KILMAINHAM in Dublin, the KILMAINHAM jail, episode 4. We left off with a comment about the importance of architecture and absorption, and that is the phenomenological process of taking in the immediate environment, and in the next image we are going to explore the grand atrium east wing of KILMAINHAM jail in Dublin. And there you go, folks. The real deal. Authenticity. Where did all the people go? Well, I told them to get out of my way. I was making a photograph. That's a joke. I deliberately walk behind the group as I do my field work so that I have space that lays bare its essence of what it is. Architecture matters because it sets the record straight. Some of you might recognize this interior from an amazing film known as In the Name of the Father. Recognize the catwalks, the caged walkways. 96 cells. This was opened in the early 1860s. We see the lanterned roof. There was a time when the curators at KILMAINHAM, as a museum, had set up the exhibition with tables and posters and other objects on display in this very space. But then they fortunately realized that the exhibition space ought to be separate from the grand atrium. I think they realized that they did not want the interior of this prison to compete with anything else. Let's absorb the interior. Steel and glass was another feature of Victorian architecture. We see evidence of that in England, obviously, also in Ireland, and later in this series of prison museums we're going to Australia, as well as South Africa. Victorian influence. Much like Eastern State in Philadelphia, this is an institution that really demands to be photographed and documented by its visitors. I can't stress enough the importance of architecture. We seem to take it for granted in our everyday lives when it is a serious art form. Catwalks, 96 cells arranged in a cylinder. This has a panoptic effect. Panopticism. Pan. Optics. See everything. Increase visibility. And as the tour guide correctly points out, this design continues to be replicated in modern and postmodern society, namely in the form of the shopping mall. Yes, folks, the shopping mall can be traced to this Victorian prison design. Increased visibility, mobility of prisoners as well as their warders, the lantern ceiling, the catwalks, steel, glass, together in space that speaks to power. And prisons are an expression of power, period. And from here, we are invited to the Stonebreaker's Yard to continue the narration of the story of KILMAINHAM and 1916 and the executions to follow. So we leave the atrium and we enter the Stonebreaker's Yard. It is here that we are informed by the tour guide that where that X, where that cross is planted into the ground is the precise location where each rebel, one by one, were executed by firing squad at close range. This is the very spot. Authenticity permeates space. It permeates location. It makes certain places reveal and convey cultural importance, even a sense of sacred, hallowed ground. This is history, and it is living history in Irish tradition. The plot thickens. We notice off to the right are double doors. That is where the ambulance transporting the last rebel to be executed, James Connolly, who was injured in the 1916 skirmish. He was injured to the extent that he was unable to stand due to a leg wound. He is transported from the hospital to KILMAINHAM jail to be executed. The British commander realizes that unlike the other rebels who stood while being fired upon, James Connolly was physically unable to stand due to his injury. The British commander ordered a chair to be placed at where the crosses stabbed into the ground. And in seated position, James Connolly was executed by a British firing squad while being seated. The semiotics of a rebel being seated while being executed requires very little interpretation. When word was released that Connolly was executed in a seated position, attitudes began to really reformulate regarding the 1916 uprising. Dubliners began to really reconsider this military adventure. Their city was destroyed. They were very proud of Dublin. And the execution of the 14 rebels, compounded with James Connolly, executed in a seated position, resulted in a seismic shift in history and commemoration. Here is a plaque that lists each of the rebels, each of the volunteers, and the date that they were executed. Language primacy, Irish first, English second. That's the way it is. And here we have the 15th volunteer in custody of the British military. He was not executed. Who might that be? That man, that rebel, that volunteer is Eamon de Valera, a household name in Irish history. Under arrest at the Richmond barracks soon after surrender, sentenced to die like the other leaders, de Valera would have been the 15th man executed at Kilmainham had he not been saved by his American citizenship. A U.S. citizen, an Irish citizen. The British did not want to tinker with the implications and the fallout of that with their American counterparts. And as a result, all changed utterly. We have to pause. We have to absorb this information. We have to reflect on these events and how they are expressed at Kilmainham Prison.